This is an opportunity for us to talk through the case study about Elsie. And you have the materials on the blackboard, so I will just lightly go over the case study and then we'll have a moment to talk about it. So, in this case study, we have Elsie, who's a 78-year-old woman, and she arrived at Toronto General Hospital about a week ago. And she's confused, she's disoriented, and she has some shortness of breath. She hasn't been eating and she's increasingly not responsive in the last couple of days. It's found upon admission that she has a severe infection to her kidneys and she'll need a feeding tube and aggressive antibiotics in order to recover. They will cause her great pain, discomfort from both the side effects of the antibiotics and the feeding tubes itself. There's no guarantee that these measures are going to save Elsie's life. The infection is quite advanced, but without them, she will certainly die within the week. They warn, though, if Elsie does survive, her baseline physical and cognitive functioning may be significantly lower. Elsie was previously diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease about 5 years ago. She's been declining. She's quite dependent on her activities of daily living. She lives with her daughter, Sarah, who serves as primary volunteer caregiver. And I use the word volunteer in the sense that she's not being paid. Sarah herself is 48 years old, divorced. She doesn't have any children. She was an accountant, but she hasn't been able to work in the last couple of years because she's been taking care of her mother pretty much full time. Elsie does have another daughter, Lori. She's also in the same city in Toronto, and she's a mother of 4. Lori's a stay-at-home mom, but she's got 4 kids to take care of, and her husband is very often away. She has 4 children, Michael, Lana, Leslie, and Luke. And there's a great concern because Michael's been getting involved in drugs lately. And Lori's had a very hard time over the last year and a half dealing with her son's needs. Sarah and Lori, the children, decided together that Elsie would live with Sarah because Lori's hands were full with the children. Lori has, however, been quite involved, offering different kinds of support, taking Elsie to appointments, visiting a couple of times a week so that Sarah can get out of the house for a few hours of each time. And Elsie seems to be quite content with this arrangement. Elsie also has a son who lives in New York, Robert, and he's 52 years old, but he's been apart from the family and quite estranged for a number of years. We're not really sure why, but it seems that there was some kind of major falling out. And the 2 daughters haven't spoken with him either. So the son, Robert, is quite estranged from the entirety of the family. Sarah presents a power of attorney document from 2 years ago upon admission into the hospital of her mother. And it states that Lori and Sarah share a power of attorney for personal care and finances. And it also insists that they must act jointly in making the personal care decisions. So there's 2 documents. One is a power of attorney for personal care, and one is a power of attorney for property. Now, in some jurisdictions, if this was, for instance, in British Columbia, they would be having an enduring power of attorney, and they would also be having a representation agreement. So in this particular case, it's in Ontario, so it's a power of attorney of personal care and a power of attorney for property. You are having a conversation in a family meeting, and it becomes increasingly evident during this family meeting that the one daughter, Lori, is in favor of giving Elsie the feeding tubes and the antibiotics. Sarah prefers to let her mother die in peace and believes that that's what she would have wanted. There's a lot of tension between the 2 sisters. Previously there hadn't been, but now it seems to be building up. Accusations are flying back and forth, and each sister is accusing the other of acting selfishly. Further, they both claim that they're acting in their mom's best interests and believe that they are following what she would have wanted. But Elsie has been unconscious for the last 12 hours. This comes to you, and you are being asked to consult with the family and trying to figure out what's happening. So what are the processes that you need to go through in your own mind? In this particular case, we have a potential advanced care plan in effect. There is a power of attorney for personal care, and it does seem like the 2 daughters who have had a history of taking care of their mother, there doesn't seem to be any concern about abuse in this particular issue, although that may require some digging into, have been taking care of their mother for some years. So how do you approach this on a practical basis? Well, first we have to make sure that Elsie is in fact incapable. Presumption is always that the person is capable. Yes, she has a diagnosis of dementia, and she has some concerns around kidney function, and many of you will know that kidney and other urinary tract infections can lead to a delirium. And right now we know that she's been unconscious. So we know that she's not currently capable of making that decision. We don't know if she wakes up, will she regain her ability to make that decision? Again, we have concerns around a potential delirium, and we have some concerns around a dementia, but you always need to assume that there's capacity. In this particular case, I think we can assume that there is not capacity and we can move on. Now, we would look at the power of attorney for personal care. Now, we know there's a power of attorney for property as well, but in this particular circumstance, I'm more interested in the power of attorney for personal care. On the face of it, does it look like it has been executed? Is it signed? This is a practical issue. Have you gone to look at the back page of it and see, has it been signed and witnessed? Now, when a power of attorney for personal care is being witnessed, it's really only usually being witnessed that it was signed and that it is in place. It doesn't necessarily attest to the fact that the person was capable when making the decision. We may need to have a look to see whether or not, in our understandings, Elsie was capable of making that decision to create a power of attorney for personal care. Now, it's interesting that she had a diagnosis of dementia 5 years ago, but the power of attorney for personal care was only created 2 years ago. It will require a good understanding whether her mother was able to make that power of attorney. If the power of attorney was executed by a lawyer, it will be much easier because you will have had the expertise of the lawyer, hopefully, who will have interviewed Elsie alone and ensuring that she understood and appreciated what she was doing in making this power of attorney. If it was created, for instance, perhaps with a kit such as that exists on the Attorney General's website for Ontario, then you may not have had the benefit of having a professional look it over. So there may be some questions about whether or not the power of attorney was created validly. And you'll have to use some of your good interviewing techniques to kind of probe that a little bit. But just because she has a diagnosis of dementia does not mean at all that she was incapable of picking somebody to be her power of attorney, particularly for personal care. So just because there's a medical diagnosis does not mean she was incapable. In this particular case, we can also see that there's a concern of this extra son. As we have learned over the course, when you have a power of attorney, it trumps the default substitute decision-making list in the Healthcare Consent Act. So the valid power of attorney for personal care made pursuant to the Substitute Decisions Act trumps any claim that the son will have if he comes in to bear. We don't know if he will or not. He's been estranged for several years. If, however, he unearths a power of attorney, who knows, he may unearth one, the fact that he's been estranged for some years and has been in conflict would lead us to be quite concerned whether that power of attorney was valid. So, when it comes down to it, we are looking at two attorneys who are supposed to act jointly, each of whom has a differing opinion about what the mother would want. Or is that the case? Let's look carefully. We see that Lori has been concerned more around perhaps whether or not it was going to be the right decision to make on the basis of the feeding tubes and antibiotics. Sarah believes her mother would prefer to die in peace. What evidence do these girls have, or do these women have, about what their mother would want? So this is an opportunity for you on a practical basis to inquire about what evidence each would want. It may be that they are able to come to an agreement that one person may have information the other does not have. Perhaps there are written wishes that one of Susan or Lori has, but not the other. Perhaps there's an opportunity to speak to other people to get more information around what they would want. Perhaps there's also an additional need to consult to try to find out what the outcomes would really be. If it can't be resolved, if they are deadlocked, then we're in a difficult situation. We may need to go to the Consent and Capacity Board for a determination. And we can do that. It's a free process, and the process will be resolved within 1 week. We have information on the Consent Capacity Board in your materials, and I encourage you to look at them online. Above all, we know that someone will make a decision for Elsie. Now, it appears that she does not have a spouse, and that would be a default person if there was a deadlock, but there's not. So in the end, we have these kids, and the kids will need to sort it out, or it will be sorted out for them pursuant to the Consent Capacity Board.